Well, welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I am an Episcopal priest, and I live here in Austin, Texas. Have had the gift of recovery for some 50 years now, and very, very grateful to the program that brought this to me and the people who contributed to my growth and development all along the way, and there were many. Purpose of these podcasts is to go deeper into the history and the psychology and the spirituality that underlie the 12-step recovery journey. I'm convinced that it is deeper and offers many more rewards to people who will really take it seriously and not superficially, and take a deep dive. So that's what I try to be about in doing this. Encourage you to go to our website. It's entitled Two-Way Prayer. We have, and that's a form of prayer that they did in the early days of the program. And there's a new video that's up there. I think you'll enjoy that, and a set of handouts. Encourage you to get into that practice. Also do a newsletter, just sent one out a few days ago. If you don't receive that, you can go to the website, Two-Way Prayer, and you can sign up for the newsletter there. And I think it also has an archive, because I just finished a series on the 12 steps from an historical perspective. So you might find that of interest. Okay, enough business. We are starting a new series now, and it is going to be titled Unshakable Foundation: How to Build an Unshakable Foundation in Recovery, no matter what 12-step fellowship you may belong to. And my guest is Tyler Dawn. She is in Dallas, up in the Dallas, Texas area. So she is sweltering as I am as a result of climate change. A little bit of background. Tyler is a very interesting person. I think you're really going to enjoy this series. She brings a lot to the table. She has worked in treatment centers, taking patients, clients to deeper levels of recovery, introducing them to that. She's a mindfulness teacher. She recently completed a degree at SMU, Perkins School of Theology, and in spiritual direction. An amazing mother of two. She's amazing and they're amazing, and has been working a 12-step program for a good number of years. And just a story to get us going, because I was thinking how Tyler and I connected. And I was doing a workshop up in the Dallas area many years ago. I was on Two-Way Prayer, and Tyler helped organize it and promote it. It was really one of the best workshops I think I've ever done. About 150 people turned out for it, and I still think there are reverberations coming from that group that was so powerful. And then she came down to Austin, and she and I went out to lunch, and I was kind of ready to spend an hour there. And I think we wound up in the restaurant for 3 or 4 hours because I was just so fascinated by her, by the program, her sincerity, and her willingness to learn and teach. And I think that's what we're going to try to explore. So Tyler, welcome. It is
Thank you.
It's great to have you with us. And I'm going to just turn it over to you initially and talk about how you came into recovery. What's a little bit of your story, and then we'll build from there. So take it away, kid.
Well, thanks, Bill. Thanks. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, and always in your presence, which is very special to me. And you are one of many that have helped me out on this journey. And the practice of two-way prayer is part of my story, and as is our visit and everything else. So my name is Tyler, and I'm an alcoholic. And I claim my sobriety date as September 23rd of 2014. that was not the day of my last drink, but that is the date that I celebrate. My last day of drinking was on September 21st, and that was the last drink that I took. And that was also the night that I took my life. And so my story is what would appear to many, and at the time I was one of a very low bottom drunk. Um, I had everything. Uh, I had a beautiful family, a beautiful home, lived in a beautiful community, had connections, and by all outward appearances, life was pretty ideal to a certain degree. I was a back porch drinker. That is where I did most of my drinking. Only my husband at the time really knew about my alcoholism. I came into alcoholism pretty late through the work that I've done after getting sober, and given the degree of my bottom, I was certainly one of those that was struggling with grave emotional and mental disorders, and I think that is very clear. But I was born into a family that appeared quite normal also. Outwardly, we were a military family. My father was Air Force. He was an officer. He was a pilot. My mom was a consummate officer's wife, and we kept a tidy home, and we all dressed cute. And I have a brother and a sister. And again, this was what would appear to be the all-American family. For me, I can say that as a very, very young child, I never felt loved or wanted in my family. Now, whether this was real or imagined, it's the way I felt. I believe that my parents loved and wanted me in the best way they could. It was not my experience, which hindsight set me on this sort of interesting course of trying to acquire those things that felt very necessary and are right to a young child and developmentally. There were a few things I can say also in addition. I am in a couple of 12-step programs. I am also in one for dysfunctional families that I have found very helpful, Al-Anon. I think all the 12-step programs to a certain degree are helpful. And I think that my first drug of choice was approval. And that was simply my way of trying to feel loved and wanted in my home. But those habits, those personality traits, those behaviors became a way of being. And, we hear a lot in the program, there are many who call themselves people pleasers, or, sort of those kind of people, where I really was all about that gaining approval, which for me sort of felt like being loved and wanted. I struggled a lot with a lot of trauma as a young girl. I had a brother who was involved in a drowning. I was the age of 6. It was the first dead person that I had actually seen. There was a lot of interfamily turmoil. There was some abuse. So I believe, in addition to being genetically predisposed, my family, my ancestors, I come from a very long line of drinkers and people with mental illness. And when I teach and when I talk, I always to sort of clarify, one of the things that I realize is that, that this disease wasn't all my fault, but it's all my responsibility. But I had to sort of understand where I came from and what caused all of that to sort of make sense. Even when I got sober and I was willing to admit that I was powerless, I wasn't really able to accept that I was powerless. Reading the doctor's opinion, understanding, I was in 3 treatment centers, and really understanding. So for me, I need to understand why things happen. It's very important. And so, sort of life went on. I had always a predisposition for excitement. That is, I loved sort of a little bit of chaos. I've always been a bit of an adventurer. And the only time I really drank in my in my earlier days was when I felt uncomfortable. So I can say, I hear people say that they enjoy having a glass of wine. I honestly do not know what that means. I have no concept of what that is. I drank to feel comfortable, especially in social situations. You know, I realize now I had, social anxiety and things like that. So I wasn't drinking. So it's an interesting thing because like I said, I don't think other than I never had any other sort of alcoholic tendencies. There were never any consequences. It wasn't really even unmanageable. But I know for a fact I drank to feel comfortable in my skin so that I would to relieve that feeling of being
Right.
uncomfortable. Yeah. And so, again, just the chaos at home and then ended up going to school for a little while. I dropped out of school, moved to Dallas, and from there was sort of swept up by this woman and ended up with a 5-year international modeling career. And I traveled the world and I came back from that, and then I opened an agency in Miami, and I did all of that, and of course, everything that went along with this. There was drinking, there was drugging, there was all the life and all that, but still, um, can honestly say, I mean, I don't feel like I crossed the line to where I began to obsess about alcohol. That's the only way
Mm.
I can describe it, where there was something that actually clicked in my brain that knew alcohol was the answer or the solution to all my problems. And so it's really interesting. I went on to get married and I had 2 beautiful boys. I had a stepson also at the time. And one of my sons was diagnosed with cancer. He's a 2-time cancer survivor. That was a pivotal moment in my life in that I think if I look back, it was probably one of the final straws that broke the alcoholic's back. It was there was a long history. And in working with others and what I get to do in recovery treatment centers and my own personal practices, sort of there seems to be a series of traumas there, or one trauma. I mean, there's got to be some sort of thing in addition to being this genetic predisposition that we have. Those other things sort of have to be in place. And mine definitely were. And it was almost like a building up of. And till I got to the point during my son's cancer journey that I became I was self-medicating. I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought I could handle it. Of course, I was terrified, didn't know how to express my feelings. Feelings were scary. And so it's what we
Amen to
do.
that.
um, it's what we do. But in the meantime, I really feel like also looking back when as a people pleaser, as a codependent, if you will, as whatever I was wearing all of these hats and I was identifying, right? I was the daughter of, I was the sister of, I was the this and the mother of my kids and the wife of, and so the only hat that I realize now that I didn't possess was the hat that actually said Tyler or
Hmm.
Tyler, child of God or child of creator or image and likeness. So, it was just, I had all these other ones and I wore them incredibly well. Um, but this realization, the powerlessness really I did have over my son's disease, and I was identified so closely in that relationship with him. My marriage began to fall apart. That identity was falling away, and it felt like me because that's who I was.
It's the who am I question
Yeah.
that, is really important. We feel foolish. I felt foolish, but I know when I put the drink down, I did not know who I was. And
Exactly.
that was the beginning of the journey, you know, that I didn't want to take
Right.
because I knew the other. Someone taught me that you'll go back to the last security you knew. And that's, I
Yes.
think, one of the reasons relapse happens so much. I mean, it does
Yes.
terrible things to us, but there
Yeah.
was an element of security that we found there. And it has that
Yes.
appeal.
Yeah, and I think too, I'm I also believe that addiction and alcoholism is a disease of self-loathing.
Mm,
Because something happened to me, and I think it was very early on, because I wasn't getting what I needed. These Maslow's, hierarchy of needs. I mean, basic needs.
yeah,
I was not receiving them, and so in that there is almost an inherent unworthiness. And then we begin trying to achieve those needs in whatever way that we can. But that original thing, I think we call it a hole in the soul.
right,
I think that's a really good way to say it. There's something missing, and that something missing causes us to feel unworthy. And we all have our fear, our desire, our thing. Maybe it's a lack of security. You didn't feel safe in your home. You didn't feel loved in your home. You didn't feel like you mattered. You didn't belong. You didn't achieve. I mean, we all sort of have a basic need and a basic desire and a basic fear, and that, I think, kind of all plays into this. And then eventually, given the right circumstances, given the right traumas, given the right, of course, we we cross that line. And as we know, the mind now, our emotional, our amygdala, emotional brain, it can no longer, you can't handle these unresolved, repressed, unidentifiable. I mean, it absolutely, it blows haywire. And then then immediately the amygdala is sending signals to our limbic system, right? It no longer goes to the prefrontal cortex. That's when you cross that line. And
mm,
then this sort of obsession, but the brain sort of decides and realizes there's a solution. And that's that line. And the solution is alcohol or drugs or whatever it is. And we can't help that. I mean, we only can once that switch is flipped.
right,
Um, it takes a program like AA or something else, and in my experience, it also takes a psychic change, which is brought on by a God of our understanding.
right.
So,
Something big enough to fill the hole.
yes,
And if it
definitely.
isn't big enough, we know it,
Mm,
and it's
right,
not going to work.
right. And
So,
prior
yeah,
to that, it has to be bad enough. That's the thing that, I mean, there's so many things that
exactly.
are so hard about this disease, but that it has to get so bad. Um,
For the
and
individual, you know.
yes,
Yeah, yeah. But I mean,
yes,
the pain that one person can put up with
yes.
can be very different from what another person experiences.
Yes, and I
So,
think that has a lot to do, we all sort of have our own cross to bear, if you will, and I think
yeah,
that cross varies in shape and size as we vary in shape and size and what our tolerance is and whatnot. And I'm yeah, I'm always really um, mindful about, yeah, when we just can't judge somebody else's path, and we can't judge somebody else's
right.
cross. We just trust that it's what they're meant to bear and carry in that way. But I up until the moment where I decided to take my life, and this was not accidental, it was quite intentional. I
Hmm.
had tried to get sober. I was unsuccessful, uh, and I was losing everything, and I couldn't go on drinking. I absolutely knew I could not go on drinking, but I couldn't imagine my life without it. And that is a moment of hopelessness. I had no hope in things going the way continuing on, and I had no hope in them changing. There was zero. And that was my moment where
I'm convinced that that is the word that is missing from step one.
mm,
You know, I read the big book and looked at how many times the word hopeless comes up. A hopeless condition of mind and body. We were men and women who had become hopeless. I underlined it maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 times. And it really is, I think, the message that underlies step one. And it's that experience that you're talking about of hopelessness. And then step two is the hope.
Yes.
It's almost like
Uh,
we need a step 1.5 that we can kind of
yes.
step over. But does that make
Yes.
sense?
Oh, I love that. No,
Uh,
absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think, and that was the, if I could choose one word in that moment where I felt like the only decision I had left
right.
simply to end my life.
Mm-hmm.
But
And and
leading up,
and in a sense, it was right.
mm,
In the sense that we did need to end that old life,
yes.
but we don't know what the hell the new one is going to look like.
Well, it's so interesting that you say that. So I really want to sort of begin what I feel like is my journey at this point,
Okay,
because
right.
um, uh, up until this point, I really staying in the solution is, I think, always not to discount, right? We don't regret the past. I've learned a lot from my past. And in my learning, in my healing, what I needed to do, and I will mention this in addition to walking through the steps, making the amends and things that I did ancestral trauma. I went back and looked at ancestral DNA. I looked at a lot of different modalities, the internal family systems. I did a lot of family work. I did just about everything you can imagine. Now, again, this was my journey. This is what I needed to understand. But I will also say this, just as far as understanding and having a sense of compassion and love for my parents that I
Mm-hmm.
never had before,
Mm-hmm.
came through doing that work and
Yeah,
understanding where they were coming from as well.
right.
So I'm really grateful for that. So as I was sitting in my car one evening on September 21st, I had passed out at a meeting. That evening, I had been out of treatment for a week. It was my second treatment center. It was back with my husband. He was giving me another opportunity, and I had been drinking for the entire week. I went to the meeting. I passed out in the meeting. My husband was called to come pick me up. Of course, you could only imagine that was pretty much the end. So I was told I would be leaving in the morning, and the documents would be it was arranged a sort of marriage where there was going to be a prenup, and that was all going to be done. And I knew he was serious, and he had every reason to be. No blame at all. However, that was the moment where everything I thought I was, all the things I was identified with, were going away, and
Mm-hmm.
there was nothing left. I could not imagine. And I couldn't quit drinking. I just knew. So I just went into our pantry. My husband at the time went upstairs to put the boys to bed and grabbed a bottle of pills. There was some vodka under my seat, and I drove to an abandoned lot, which is where I prayed. I
Mm-hmm.
was a self-described God girl up until this point. I was active in the church, Bible study. I had a very, 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 what I believe, deep faith at the time, a deep belief at the time. And it was just my final foxhole prayer, you know, um,
Mm-hmm.
just God, I know this is the big one. I knew, this is not something that someone does and sort of expects to be let in through the gates. But I just begged. And so I did. I proceeded to take 28 tirazidones and drink a fifth of vodka. And I was already quite intoxicated. And I'm here, and I went without medical attention. And so slumped over in the front seat of my car for many, many, many hours. Um, there was an experience that happened there, which would be a different, maybe podcaster. Maybe you and I can have lunch again. um, but ended up making it back to my home, no recollection whatsoever. The following day, and then ended up, the next thing I really remember is saying goodbye to my children, and then sort of coming to in another treatment facility, but with a suitcase and sort of, I mean, it was done. I was done, a big book Bible, my personal belongings, and that was really it. So I was there for 5 days, and I'd come off detox, and I was kneeling beside my bed, and I was reading from the big book, and there's a page, and the line on that page, the very last line of the paragraph, talks about us being reborn. It is a beautiful, beautiful line. And it was at that moment that I can only describe as being what was my spiritual awakening. I was immediately falling. I had the sensation of falling and free falling, and a fear that I could only imagine, and then all of a sudden sort of being caught. We all have those dreams where we fall, those falling dreams.
Yes.
Sort of like that on steroids, and being sort of caught and held and I landed quite softly. I looked around. It was a bright light. There was a source over here to my left that I had absolutely no doubt was God, although I don't know how I knew, because it was like a God I had not ever imagined or believed in before. I simply just knew. There was a knowing there. And there was sort of pieces of broken glass. It was like kind of glittery, sparkly, and you could see shards, like shards of broken glass, which is so interesting that you said that. And I knew I was in the presence of God, and I knew that this broken was my life, was representative of my life. And the communication went like this, and it was all telepathic, if you will. I recognized what this was, and the message I got back was, yes, this is your life, but this is not your old life. This is your new life. And me, being the sarcastic alcoholic that I am, I said, oh, great, that I just feel so much better. Phew. And this source, power, laughed.
Yeah.
And I recognized that laugh because it was my grandfather's, who was my person and had passed many years. And I was down on my knees, and I started looking closely. And indeed, it was this shattered, but I noticed there were some sides of it that were shiny, like reflective. And there were other sides of it that were matte, almost like a puzzle. Now, what you have to know about me is I am an avid puzzle person. So this is all part of like, I'll immediately sort of making, and I'm like, all right. So I'm getting like, this is all kind of bit the puzzle pieces of life. Like I'm connecting the dots, like, and I reach down, and there's this force, there's this resistance. And I'm sort of trying to put the message is, you can do this by yourself, or we can do it together. It's a decision I made like that. And when I made that decision to do it together, my hand went down. I was able to flip these pieces over that were on the mat side, and sort of flipping them over, but still kind of recognizing this is going to be really challenging. And I also immediately, as a puzzle person, began to look for the edges. And his voice simply said to me, no, we're going to start in the center. Okay, well, number one, God has never done a puzzle in his life. Me thinking this is going to be, and the laugh again, which, and I just said, okay. And in that moment, I knew what had to be done, how it needed to be done. And the light began to fade. And I knew that this moment was over. And before that happened, I said, wait, I need the box. Puzzle people out there, people that know, why do we need the box? Because it has the picture. And the final message was, you don't need to know what it looks like. I do. And so after that, I came around, I came back to the space, still on my knees, still up on the second floor of Valley Hope, still a bit out of it, but I ran down and found my chaplain and relayed to her what had happened. And so that experience taught me a lot, and it continues to unfold. But the most interesting thing that for me was the God that I had believed in was nothing like the God that I met.
Mm-hmm.
And what that also told me, what else have I gotten wrong? Like, what
Right.
else have I believed in that's not actually true? And I thought, if that's
Quite a bit. I mean,
so,
that's,
recovery for me was it's an undoing, right? It's
yeah,
about subtraction. It is an unlearning. And I love Father Richard Rohr, who is he's my guru. And but I sort of felt like there was going to be this process, and it was going to be dual. It was going to be about unlearning and learning, and somehow simultaneously. And I
right.
would know how that would look. And boy, I'll tell you, when I look back at almost 9 years of this life, there's only been one really set of footprints in the sand, and they have not been mine. I mean, where mine are, they go into the ocean. But those are the ones are mine. The other ones are either God or somebody that God hired to take care of me. This journey, and this I cannot stress enough, as a person who prides herself on being self-sufficient and
Mm-hmm.
all of that, there's absolutely no way. I didn't do it alone. I couldn't have done it alone. I still can't do it alone. It's something it was hard for me to learn. It was hard for me to learn.
It's an ongoing lesson.
Yeah. And
Um,
so I
yeah.
stayed in treatment. I had a couple of but almost immediately, when I had been through 2 treatment centers, I was familiar with the steps. I'd walked through so I had a little bit of a heads up. But I was all in. I sort of had pretty clear-cut directions on what needed to happen. I needed help, and I didn't need to know what the end result looked like. So that whole living, one day at a time. And so those for me, and what I think is also significant, Bill, about my experience is this: I'm pretty convinced that had anybody else been me sitting there in that space, they would not have recognized the source as being the God of their understanding. I felt like that experience was so specific to me
Yes.
that only I could really relate, could understand, could have that kind of community. I mean, it was intimate. It was
Yes.
intimate, intimate, intimate. I knew that God he knew everything about me, and the way I thought, and the way the things that meant the
Yeah.
most to me. It couldn't have been anybody else. And so I had to get to know this new God that I met. And just like when you meet anybody for the first time and there's an interest, and how do you spend time together? You do things together. You have these little testing, like trust tests, and I would give God a little something to kind of see tests, like, let's see how he does it, this or whatever and so there was this is how it's been. And with any relationship, it takes work.
Right. And it takes experience. It takes
Oh,
experience.
yes. And it takes outside help, and it takes resources. It takes a village, whether it's this program. I mean, I say a lot, the program offers us this toolbox. I have an arsenal, and that's just the way that I've done this thing. There's a line in our preamble, and it stuck out to me pretty early on when we talk about helping people and coming into the program. And it says, "We are not saints," which I was
Mm.
just so grateful for that line. And
Yeah.
it says, "Then the point is," here's the point. Here's the point. We're willing to grow along spiritual lines. That's the point of the whole program. It says right there, and we hear it every time we sit in a meeting. And that was profound to me. I thought,
Mm-hmm.
well, if that's the point, then okay, that's what I'm going to do. And so started this adventure, this really just unbelievable adventure. The 12 steps laid down and continues to be the foundation on which the rest of my life has grown. I've studied every faith tradition, every culture, every religion, you name it. And I've observed and I've walked through the steps that they go through, or the processes. I am a Buddhist practitioner. I'm a yogi. I'm a yoga teacher. I spent a month in India. I'm Native American Indian, and I've gone through that. I was healed in Hawaii through Hawaiian spirituality. And these are the lines that I've gotten to grow along. These are the lines, and I look at recovery as this amazing buffet, like the best buffet you can imagine, just like overwhelming. And we get a chance to walk into this buffet.
Yes.
I take the things I need to sustain me, which is prayer and meditation, self-evaluation, self-examination. And then I pick a few side items. What else can I do? I think it is Richard Rohr says this: the 12 steps is America's contribution to spirituality. And I believe that with all of my heart, with all of my experience.
Of course, get in trouble with this one. Perhaps the reason for that, in part, is America is so addicted.
We all are.
Our culture, I think we have taken it to new heights. I think the culture has really moved in that direction. I go to other cultures and who have stayed a little closer to their traditions, and so that they're connected with them in a healthy way. And the whole doesn't get quite as big. I mean, the number of suicides, the number of drug addicts we've got. I mean, we lead the charts. And that's what I'm saying is I'm in agreement that the steps are a marvelous pathway, and Wilson got them from the Oxford group, and the Oxford group got them from various traditions and individuals. It's nothing marvelously new. It's just that they're put together in a way that if you're in the hole we were talking about. There's a way to climb out
from everything, and
from everything. Yes.
And I in my business, in my private business, I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, and I use the 12 steps for other people. And I love how it says at the beginning of the 12 and 12, and it states in the introduction about how many people that not alcoholic that find this extremely useful. And I believe that, and I have been able to work with people who are sort of overcoming other things. I personally, after I got sober, the one thing that I really was powerless over was the fact that I had lost this relationship with my children. They were living with their father. I had rented a home, moved out. I had provided rooms for them. We had joint custody, but they were of the age where they could decide where they wanted to be. My very wise sponsor, suggested that I not make them feel guilty or make them feel obligated to come and see me, that they were old enough to decide. And given the nature of my incident, I did that. But I tell you what, Bill, 3-4 months sober and not being able to see my kids and do the things with them that I wanted to do, and having the life, being the mom, right? My identity as their mother. And I worked the steps because my sponsor said to me, Tyler, it sounds like you're powerless over the way you feel about your children, and your life is going to become really unmanageable. I said, oh yeah, this will be the one thing I'll drink over because I can't handle it. And she said, all right, well, let's go through the steps. That was harder than getting sober. Letting go of what I believed was the power and the entitlement that I had over my children.
Yeah.
These kids were a gift to me. They were an absolute gift to me. And it took acknowledging my entitlement and acknowledging what I felt like I I deserved as their mother. I'll be quite honest. It was incredibly humbling. I mean, thank goodness our relationship today is so wonderful. My kids are
Good.
fantastic. But you know what? Had it not been for the 12 steps, I really could have screwed that up very early on. And I work with lots of women. I mean, I'm active in the program. I think sponsorship when we get to talking
Yeah, we'll
about,
get into sponsorship.
yeah, it's well, an unbelievable gift.
When we were chatting
Mm,
about the directions this little series might take, you said something that I think would really set the stage for us going forward, and that is you gave me some insights into happy, joyous, and free
mm,
that I don't think I had experienced personally before. I wonder if you could kind of review those with us,
sure.
and then just kind of tell listeners where we're going on finding that third element.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Um, yes. So as we say, and rightly so, that this program is meant to bring about a life that is happy, joyous, and free. And I think it is absolutely beautiful. What I've experienced and what I have witnessed is almost as if these three things are almost three different levels, if you will, or three different, people walk through the 12 steps and they get sober and they're pretty happy. Their families and their friends are really happy.
They're staying out of jail.
But it's sort of like that happiness for me. Happiness is contingent on something else, right? We need something else to be happy. It's not viable. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It's just not sustainable. And so I think when there are those that walk through the steps that, get sober, and then they'll show up at a meeting when they're, sitting in front of a liquor store, or maybe they're getting ready to berate their wife or partner, or whatever. And then, and then they kind of get back on the beam, and then they go back out to life. And then they kind of, then so their happiness really comes and goes, and their happiness just, it dictates their
Mm.
life. So I would say in an emotional sobriety sort of way, not very much. Then there's a second level of people, and those are the joyous people. Those joyous folks have gone through the steps. They have been of service to others. They're perhaps practicing the principles in other areas of their life. They have developed some sense of they've identified, right, with this whole conscious contact, this hole in the soul, and the happiness can come and go. It just
Right.
does. The joy is internal. The joy is that place that really nobody or nothing can really rock very easily. And that is through honesty, that's through humility, that's through service. I mean, I believe joy comes from those elements. There's elements of joy. And then there's another group or another category, and I get to see in other areas, and that's this group. They're free of suffering, they're free of, these are the people that have ceased fighting anything and everything. It says it in our book. That's a huge statement. And they're continually wanting to grow in understanding and effectiveness, right? Great line from our book. So many little pearls of wisdom. But I think because the point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. And the book also suggests in many places that we meditate in the morning with a partner or a spouse. We reach out to a minister. I was just reading today, of course, a line about other religions, and how do we appreciate that, and we might want to consider giving them some credit. I mean, it's really for if we're going to be honest, it's all written there. You know, I don't know that I would call myself a purist of anything because I'm just like a Heinz, whatever, 1,000,057, but I'm a little bit of everything and I like it that way. But there's this level. And for me, it has come through a daily practice of meditation, prayer, and self-examination, which is how we arrived at the title for this series together.
Yeah.
So I'll just really quickly, for anyone who's not familiar, in the 12 steps and the 12 traditions, in step 11, I'll read just a little bit, and this is sort of where we'll be going moving forward. For those of us who have come to make regular use of prayer would no more do without it than we would refuse air, food, and sunshine. And for the same reason, when we refuse air, light, or food, the body suffers. And when we turn away from meditation and prayer, we likewise deprive our minds, our emotions, and our intuition of vitally needed support. As the body can fail its purpose for lack of nourishment, so can the soul. We all need the light of God's reality, the nourishment of his strength, and the atmosphere of his grace. To an amazing extent, the facts of AA life confirm this ageless truth. There is a direct linkage among self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Taken separately, these practices can bring much relief and benefit, but when they are logically related and interwoven, the result is an unshakable foundation for life. Now and then, we may be granted a glimpse of that ultimate reality, which is God's kingdom, and we will be comforted and assured that our own destiny in that realm will be secure for so long as we try, however falteringly, to find and to do the will of our Creator. That's been my experience, Bill, and I want to share that.
I knew that was your experience when we first met, that this is a person who went down and they're connected and was transformed. And you've shared some of your journey with me even since then, but it's been an ongoing journey. And you are a person who, this free bunch, happy, joyous, free. There are not that many who make it over to that side, are there? I don't find that. But I've found people who have, and they are the ones who light me on fire, and you're one of them.
Wow.
So I thank you for that, and I look forward to putting together a series of teachings and sharings and helping all of us to move further in that direction of freedom. I had a guest on several weeks ago, and we had talked. She was very much 50 some odd years into Oxford group life and prayer and meditation, and I mentioned the four absolutes. And she said almost instantly, "Oh, I don't talk about the four absolutes. I talk about the four freedoms."
Mm.
And they're the same words.
Mm.
But it's not you must. It's if you dare, if you're willing, you can be free. You can be free.
Yes.
And so I'm really looking forward to freeing myself up in the weeks ahead and putting ourselves in position to learn from you. You have a great deal to teach. So
Thank you.
I thank you so much for being our guest. And I thank you guys for listening. I hope you'll come back for the series because I think Tyler is an excellent teacher and she's done her work and she knows the way out.
Yikes.
and we'll guide us. We'll guide us
Of
there.
course,
And
of course, of
yeah,
course. And
yeah,
I hope that my words, at the very least, would encourage um, those to seek. And I hope my story, and the reason I share it is because if someone like me can be saved and offered an opportunity to do something, anybody can.
yeah. And
Thank you.
you're willing to go to any lengths to do it. That's what I love
I
about you. So thank you
thank you.
for being our guest. I thank you guys for listening. Keep coming back. I will put Tyler's email address and website into the show notes. So if you want to get in touch with her, do drop her a line. Okay. Thanks so much.
I
God
love that.
bless, and see you soon.